Betrayal does not always come with a dagger in the dark. Sometimes it comes dressed in white lace, standing at the altar you paid for. Isabella Vane stood frozen in the shadowed archway of St. Jude's Cathedral, her breath hitched in a throat raw from silent screaming. Inside, the organ played the hymn she had chosen, the guests sat in the pews she had assigned, and the priest held the Bible she had bound. But the hand Edmund Sterling held didn't belong to her. It belonged to her sister. The world thought Isabella was merely late. They did not know she was being erased. But high in the gallery, a man known only for his ruthlessness watched the tragedy unfold, deciding that a jilted bride might be exactly the weapon he required. The morning of June 4th, 1813, broke over the rolling hills of Somerset with a deceptive brilliance. Sunlight flooded the bedchamber of Isabella Vane, catching the dust motes dancing in the air and illuminating the ivory satin gown draped over the dress form in the corner. It was a masterpiece of French lace and English resilience, stitched by Isabella's own hand over the last 6 months. Isabella sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection. At 22, she was considered on the shelf by the vicious standards of the ton. But Edmund Sterling had never seemed to care. He was the boy next door, the heir to the modest but respectable Sterling baronetcy. They had an understanding that predated their formal betrothal by a decade. Today, she would become Lady Sterling. It was the safe, warm ending to a quiet life. The door to her chamber flew open with uncharacteristic violence. It was not her maid, Hannah, but her father, Baron Reginald Vane. His face was a mottled shade of crimson, his cravat half-tied, smelling faintly of the brandy he usually reserved for the evening. "Father?" Isabella stood, clutching her silk robe tighter. "Is something wrong with the carriages? Is it Edmund?" "Sit down, Isabella," Reginald barked, closing the door firmly behind him. He refused to look her in the eye, focusing instead on the heavy oak wardrobe behind her. "I will not sit. You are frightening me. Has there been an accident?" "There has been an occurrence." Reginald walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawns. "There will be a wedding today, Isabella. The guests have arrived. The breakfast is laid. The bishop is robbing." Isabella let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Thank God. For a moment I thought—" "But it will not be your wedding," he interrupted, his voice flat. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Isabella blinked, a small, confused smile touching her lips. "I don't understand. It is June 4th. It is my wedding day." "Edmund came to me an hour ago," Reginald said, finally turning to face her. The look in his eyes wasn't pity, it was annoyance. He was a man who hated complications, and Isabella had just become a massive one. He confessed to a situation, a prolonged indiscretion. Indiscretion? With Clarissa. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Clarissa, her younger sister. 19, golden-haired, vivacious, and the apple of their father's eye. Where Isabella was bookish and practical, Clarissa was a whirlwind of charm and vanity. "Edmund and Clarissa," Isabella whispered. "No, that is impossible. Edmund was with me yesterday. We walked the gardens. He spoke of our future children. And he was with your sister the night before that, and many nights prior," Reginald snapped. "She is with child, Isabella. 2 months along, she claims. She told him this morning she would not hide it any longer. If she is not married by noon, the Vane name is ruined. We will be social pariahs. No one will receive us." Isabella felt her knees give way. She sank onto the vanity stool, her hand gripping the edge of the mahogany table until her knuckles turned white. A baby. While Isabella had been hand-stitching lace and writing thank-you notes, Edmund, sweet, reliable Edmund, had been creeping into her sister's bed down the hall. "So," Isabella said, her voice trembling with a rage she had never known she possessed. "The wedding proceeds?" "It must," her father said, checking his pocket watch. "The licenses have been adjusted. The names are similar enough that the bishop agreed to overlook the clerical error for a hefty donation to the church roof. You will not attend, of course. You will claim a migraine. We will say you took ill, and Clarissa, out of the goodness of her heart, stepped in to save the alliance between our families." "The goodness of her heart?" Isabella laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "She stole my life, father, and you are handing it to her on a silver platter." "I am saving this family from disgrace," Reginald roared, slamming his hand against the doorframe. "Do you think I care about your broken heart? I care about the legacy. Clarissa carries a sterling air. You carry nothing but books and old maid fantasies. Stay in this room. Do not show your face until the reception is over." He left, the lock clicking audibly from the outside. Isabella sat in the silence, the ivory dress in the corner now looking like a ghost. She was a prisoner in her own home on her wedding day, while the man she loved married the sister she had raised. But Reginald Vane had made a critical error. He had forgotten that the servants' staircase, hidden behind the tapestry in the hallway, connected to the dressing room next door, a door he hadn't locked. Isabella stood up. She did not cry. The time for tears would come later. Now was the time for witnessing. She stripped off her robe and dressed, not in the wedding gown, but in a gown of severe, midnight blue velvet, mourning clothes for a living death. She would not hide. She would go to the church. She would make them look her in the eye. St. Jude's was suffocatingly warm. Isabella had slipped in through the side entrance, standing in the shadows of the vestibule, hidden by a heavy stone pillar. She watched as Clarissa walked down the aisle. Her sister wore the dress. That was the blow that nearly buckled Isabella's legs. Clarissa hadn't even had the decency to find her own gown. She was wearing the French lace Isabella had pricked her fingers on for months. It hung loosely on Clarissa's slighter frame, bunched at the waist, a grotesque mockery of the perfect fit it had been on Isabella. At the altar, Edmund looked pale, sweating profusely. He didn't look like a man in love. He looked like a man caught in a trap. When Clarissa reached him, she smirked, a small, triumphant curl of her lips that only a sister would recognize. She didn't love Edmund. Isabella realized that with a jolt of clarity. Clarissa loved winning, and she had just won the biggest prize in their small, provincial world. "If anyone here knows of any just cause," the bishop intoned. The silence stretched. Isabella stepped forward, her foot hitting the stone floor with a sharp clack. Heads turned. Edmund looked up, his eyes widening in horror. Clarissa stiffened. Isabella said nothing. She didn't object. She simply stood there, a dark spectre in blue velvet against the sea of pastels. She held Edmund's gaze until he flinched and looked away. That was her victory. He would remember this moment every time he looked at his wife. He would remember the woman who stood tall while he cowered. The ceremony concluded in a rush of murmured Latin. The kiss was chaste, almost repulsed. As the couple turned to walk back up the aisle, the whispers began. The ton was not stupid. They saw the dress that didn't fit. They saw the older sister standing like a statue of judgment in the back. They saw the shame on the groom's face. Isabella turned to leave before they reached her, pushing open the heavy oak doors to step out into the blinding afternoon sun. A dramatic performance. A deep baritone voice drawled from the shadows of the portico. "Though I admit, I was hoping you would throw a hymn book." Isabella spun around, her heart hammering. Leaning against the stone archway, idly twisting a gold signet ring, was a man who looked entirely out of place in the rustic Somerset countryside. He was tall, powerfully built, wearing a coat of black wool that cost more than her father's entire estate. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was all sharp, angles and cynicism. But it was his eyes that arrested her, cold, intelligent, and piercingly blue. She knew him by reputation, though they had never met. Everyone knew him. Sebastian Blackwood, the 9th Duke of Ashford. He was one of the wealthiest men in England, and certainly the most dangerous. Rumours followed him like smoke, that he had killed a man in a duel in Vienna, that he had multiplied the Blackwood fortune through ruthless trade deals in the Indies, that he possessed a heart made of granite. "Your Grace," Isabella said, dropping into a curtsy that was mechanically perfect despite her shaking hands. "I did not know you were in Somerset." "I have an estate nearby. Blackwood Hall. I rarely use it," he said, pushing off the wall and walking toward her. He moved with the predatory grace of a large cat. "I came to inspect the tenants, but I heard there was to be a wedding. I do enjoy a good farce." "I am glad my humiliation provides you with entertainment," Isabella said, lifting her chin. She had nothing left to lose. She would not cower before a duke. Sebastian stopped a foot away from her. He smelled of sandalwood, tobacco, and rain. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Humiliation? Is that what you think this is? I saw a woman standing amidst the wreckage of her life without shedding a tear. That is not humiliation, Miss Vane. That is fortitude. You know my name? I make it my business to know the names of everything on my land, or near it. You are Isabella, the responsible one, the one who manages the accounts while the Baron drinks his brandy." Isabella stiffened. "You are well informed. And you are now without a prospect," Sebastian stated brutally. "Your dowry was likely consumed to pay for that wedding breakfast. Your reputation will be tattered by the rumours. You will be the spinster aunt living in the attic, nursing your sister's bastard while she plays the lady of the manor." Isabella felt the sting of tears finally prickling her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. "Why are you saying this? To be cruel." "To be accurate," Sebastian corrected. "I have no patience for delusions, but I do have a use for fortitude." He looked toward the church doors, which were beginning to open as the guests spilled out. "I need a wife, Isabella," he said, his voice lowering. Isabella blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, is persistent. She threatens to cut off my access to certain family trusts if I do not marry by my 30th birthday, which is, inconveniently, in 3 weeks. Furthermore, I require a hostess for my London season who can manage a household, deter social climbers, and has enough spine to stand up to me." He looked back at her. "I watched you in that church. You have spine." "You are proposing?" Isabella asked, incredulous. "Here? Now? Because you saw me get jilted?" "I am proposing a business arrangement," Sebastian said coolly. "I offer you protection, a title that outranks everyone in this county, including your father and that worm Sterling, and financial independence. You offer me order, an heir eventually, and peace from my grandmother." The church bells began to ring, a joyous peal that sounded like a funeral dirge to Isabella. She saw Edmund and Clarissa emerging into the sunlight, laughing, the centre of attention. Clarissa spotted Isabella and waved, a gesture of faux sweetness that made Isabella's blood boil. She looked back at the Duke. He was a stranger. He was dangerous. He was everything she had been taught to fear. But he was offering her a sword when everyone else had handed her a shroud. "If I say yes," Isabella whispered, "will you take me away from here? Immediately?" Sebastian's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile. He extended his arm. "My carriage is around the corner. We can be in London by tomorrow night. You won't even have to pack a bag. I will buy you the world, Isabella, if only to see the look on your father's face when he realizes he's sold the wrong daughter." Isabella looked at Edmund one last time. He was fussing over Clarissa's train. He looked small. She turned to the Duke of Ashford and placed her hand on his arm. The wool was warm. "Then let us go, Your Grace," she said. "I believe I am done with Somerset." The carriage ride to London was a study in suffocating silence. Sebastian Blackwood did not make polite conversation. As the green fields of Somerset gave way to the cobbled, sooty outskirts of the capital, he remained engrossed in a stack of parliamentary papers, occasionally making sharp, violent marks in the margins with a graphite pencil. Isabella sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap over the midnight blue velvet of her dress. She had no luggage, no maid, and no ring. She was fleeing the only home she had ever known with a man whose reputation could curdle milk. Yet, as she watched the gas lamps of London flicker past the carriage window, she felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. The worst had already happened. She had been erased by the people who were supposed to love her. This man opposite her, with his hard jaw and cold eyes, at least offered her the courtesy of a transaction where the terms were clear. They arrived at Ashford House, in Mayfair, well past midnight. Isabella had expected a grand townhouse. What she saw was a palace trapped between other buildings. It was a monolith of grey stone, 3 stories high, with a facade so imposing it seemed to scowl at the street. When the footman opened the carriage doors, Isabella stepped out, her legs stiff. Sebastian offered his arm. It was the first time they had touched since leaving the church portico. His muscles were rigid beneath his expensive coat. "Welcome home, such as it is," he muttered. The entrance hall was cavernous, dominated by a twin staircase of black marble and a chandelier that looked heavy enough to crush a regiment. A line of servants stood shivering in their liveries. Sebastian ignored them entirely, striding toward a severe-looking woman in black bombazine. "Mrs. Croft, this is Miss Vane. Prepare the rose suite. She will be staying." Mrs. Croft's eyes widened slightly, the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. "Staying, Your Grace? In what capacity?" "As the future Duchess of Ashford, we marry tomorrow. Ensure the chapel is ready by 10 a.m. and find a bishop who isn't hungover." He didn't wait for a response. He turned to Isabella. "Dinner will be sent to your room. I have business in the study. Do not wait up." He vanished into the shadows of a side corridor before Isabella could even nod. The wedding the next morning was a grim parody of the one she should have had. There were no flowers, no hymns, and no guests, save for Mrs. Croft and Sebastian's solicitor, Mr. Davies, a man who looked like he was made of dried parchment. Isabella wore a pale grey travelling dress Mrs. Croft had hastily acquired. Sebastian wore the same black coat from the day before. He spoke the vows with the efficiency of a man closing a shipping deal. When he slid the ring onto her finger, a heavy band of gold inset with a singular, massive sapphire that felt cold against her skin. He didn't look at her hands. He looked over her shoulder at the exit. "Aye, Sebastian. Take thee, Isabella." It was over in 20 minutes. Back in the vast, echoing library of Ashford House, Sebastian finally poured 2 glasses of sherry. He handed one to Isabella. She took it, needing the fortitude. "Now," Sebastian said, leaning against the mantelpiece, looming over her as she sat in a high-backed leather chair. "The ground rules. I am a man who values 2 things, silence and obedience. My life outside this house is chaotic. I require my home to be a monastery." "You want me to be a nun?" Isabella asked, her voice stronger than she expected. The sherry was warming her blood. Sebastian's lip curled. "Hardly. You are my wife. You will manage this household. Mrs. Croft is capable but unimaginative. The staff is terrified of me, which makes them clumsy. You will fix that. You will manage the accounts, plan the menus, handle the correspondence, and ensure that when I return here, I am not bothered by trivialities." "And what do I receive in return besides food and shelter?" Isabella challenged. She was done being passive. Sebastian looked at her then, really looked at her, his blue eyes, assessing her frame in a way that made her breath catch. It wasn't lust, it was the look a predator gives prey. It hasn't decided whether to eat or toy with. "You receive the protection of my name. No one in London will dare slight you. You will have an allowance that exceeds your father's annual income. You will have freedom, Isabella, within the walls I define." He paused, swirling his sherry. "As for the marital bed, I have no immediate requirement for an heir. You will occupy the Rose Suite. I occupy the East Wing. Our lives will run parallel, rarely intersecting, unless social obligations demand it." Isabella felt a complex wave of emotion, massive relief that she would not be forced into intimacy with this imposing stranger, followed by a sharp, stinging needle of insult. He found her useful, but clearly not desirable. "I understand the terms of our arrangement, Your Grace," she said quietly, setting down the glass. "I will not fail you." "See that you don't," Sebastian said, finishing his drink in one swallow, "because unlike your father, I do not return damaged goods." The first 2 weeks of Isabella's marriage were spent in a flurry of activity that allowed her little time to brood over the wreckage of her past. Ashford House was immense and poorly managed. Sebastian had been absent for years, preferring his clubs or his estates abroad, and the servants had grown lax. Isabella Vane, the practical spinster sister, had finally found her calling. She was efficient, fair, and possessed a quiet authority that the staff quickly responded to. She moved through the marble corridors like a calm breeze, reorganizing linen closets, auditing the wine cellar, and negotiating better prices with the London tradesmen who had been fleecing the absent Duke for years. She saw Sebastian rarely. They dined together perhaps 3 times a week at a table, long enough to seat 30. He would ask about the household accounts. She would reply with figures. It was civilized, cold, and perfectly functional. Then, the Dowager Duchess arrived. Helena Blackwood was 80 years old, walked with an ebony cane topped with silver, and possessed a tongue sharper than any guillotine. She arrived unannounced one rainy Tuesday, sweeping into the drawing room where Isabella was reviewing menus. Isabella stood, dropping a curtsy. The Dowager circled her slowly, tapping her cane on the floorboards, inspecting Isabella as one might inspect a prize mare at an auction. "Too thin," Helena declared finally, stopping in front of Isabella, "and pale. You look like a drowned rat, girl. Is my grandson starving you?" "His Grace is perfectly generous, Your Grace," Isabella said, holding the old woman's gaze. Helena cackled. "His Grace is a stone statue who wouldn't know a good woman if she bit him on the nose. But you have good bones, and eyes that don't leak tears at the first sign of criticism. You'll do. Do for what, Mum?" "For the sharks, my dear. Sebastian married you in secret. Cowardly business. The Ton is frothing at the mouth with rumors. They say he bought you from a brothel in Covent Garden. They say you have 2 heads. Helena thumped her cane. "We must present you. A ball. Here. Next week." "A ball? But we are not prepared." "Then get prepared. You are the Duchess of Ashford now. Act like it." The following week was blurred with dressmakers, florists, and caterers. Sebastian, to Isabella's surprise, gave her carte blanche. "Spend whatever is necessary to silence them," was his only instruction. The night of the ball, Isabella stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room. The woman staring back was unrecognizable. Gone were the pastel muslins of Somerset. She wore a gown of emerald silk, cut daringly low, shimmering with silver embroidery. Around her throat was the Ashford necklace, a staggering cascade of diamonds and emeralds that Sebastian had sent to her room an hour ago via his valet without a note. She looked regal. She looked powerful. She looked like a woman who could not be hurt. She met Sebastian at the top of the grand staircase. He stopped mid-stride when he saw her. He was resplendent in formal evening wear, the garter sash across his chest, looking devastatingly handsome and utterly forbidding. His eyes raked over her, lingering on the jewels at her throat, then meeting her gaze. For a split second, the icy mask slipped, revealing something hot and turbulent beneath. "Adequate," he murmured, offering his arm. "I praise your grace," she replied dryly, taking it. They descended into the ballroom. The moment the footman announced, "His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, and Her Grace, the Duchess," the music stopped. 300 heads turned. The silence was absolute. Isabella felt Sebastian's arm tense beneath her hand, pulling her slightly closer to his side. It was a protective gesture, unconscious, perhaps, but grounding. They walked through the parting crowd like royalty parting the Red Sea. The evening was an ordeal of scrutiny. Isabella felt eyes on her back constantly. The women whispered behind fans, assessing the cost of her silk, the size of her diamonds. The men stared with open curiosity at the unknown woman who had captured the elusive Wolf of Ashford. The trouble began near the champagne fountain. Isabella had escaped for a moment of air when she was cornered by Lady Caroline Finch. Caroline was a vision in rose pink, a celebrated beauty who had spent the last 3 seasons assuming she would eventually wear the Ashford diamonds. "My dear," Caroline drawled, her smile brittle. "Whatever are you doing hiding over here? It's all just too overwhelming for a country mouse, isn't it?" "I am perfectly fine, Lady Caroline," Isabella said politely, trying to step past her. Caroline blocked her path. "It's terribly brave of you to show your face. Everyone is talking about it. How your own sister stole your fiancé right at the altar, and then you just ran away with the first rich man who offered you a carriage ride. It must be devastating to know you were second best in Somerset, and now you're just a purchase in London." The cruelty of it took Isabella's breath away. It was the exact fear Sebastian had articulated in the churchyard. Before Isabella could compose a retort, a shadow fell over them. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Lady Caroline?" Sebastian's voice was low, silky, and terrifying. Caroline spun around, paling instantly. "Your Grace, I was just welcoming your lovely bride." Sebastian stepped past Caroline, placing himself between her and Isabella. He didn't even look at the other woman. His focus was entirely on his wife. He reached out, his gloved knuckles grazing Isabella's cheek in a gesture that was shockingly intimate for public view. "Are you unwell, my dear?" Sebastian asked Isabella, his voice loud enough to be heard by the dozen people eavesdropping nearby. "You look flushed. Is the company boring you?" He turned his head slowly, fixing Caroline with a glare that would stop a charging cavalry horse. "Never mistake my wife for someone who requires your pity, Lady Caroline," Sebastian said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the ballroom. "Isabella is not a purchase. She is the only woman in this room with enough spine to bear my name, and the next person who dares to disrespect the Duchess of Ashford will find themselves socially extinct before sunrise. Do I make myself clear? Caroline Finch fled, looking like she might faint. Sebastian turned back to Isabella. His expression was intense, his jaw tight. "Did she hurt you?" he demanded quietly. Isabella looked up at him, heart pounding. He had defended her, publicly, brutally, and completely. It wasn't business, it was possession. "No, Sebastian," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. "I am unharmed." He let out a sharp breath, took her hand, and placed it firmly on his arm. "Come, the waltz is starting. We have a performance to finish." As they stepped onto the floor, Sebastian Blackwood, the man who wanted a nun for a wife, pulled her flush against his hard chest, his hand burning through the silk at her waist. For the first time in her life, Isabella Vane didn't feel invisible. She felt dangerous. Autumn descended upon London in a cloak of grey mist and wood smoke. 3 months had passed since the ball, and the rhythm of life at Ashford House had settled into a strange, silent harmony. Isabella and Sebastian were like 2 planets orbiting the same sun, their paths crossing with increasing frequency, and a gravitational pull that neither acknowledged but both felt. Isabella had become a formidable duchess. The staff adored her, not out of fear, as they did Sebastian, but out of a fierce loyalty born of her competence. She had turned the drafty, echoing mansion into a home. Fresh flowers from the conservatory brightened the dark corners. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back to let in the pale sunlight, and for the first time in a decade, laughter was heard in the servants' hall. Sebastian watched her. He watched her across the breakfast table as she read her correspondence. He watched her from the balcony of his study as she directed the gardeners in the courtyard. He was a man who had spent his life building walls, and he was finding, to his profound irritation and secret fascination, that Isabella was quietly dismantling them, brick by brick. But peace, as Isabella had learned, was a fragile thing. It shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. Isabella was in the morning room, embroidering a handkerchief, a habit from her old life that helped her think, when the butler, Mr. Henderson, entered. His face was a mask of professional disapproval. "Your Grace," he intoned, "there are visitors. They have no card. They claim to be family." Isabella's needle paused mid-stitch. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. "Family?" "A Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, Your Grace, and Baron Vane." The air left the room. They were here, in London, at her door. "Show them to the blue drawing room, Henderson," Isabella said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "And bring tea, the good china. But do not inform the Duke just yet. He is in meetings." She stood up, smoothing the skirts of her sapphire walking dress. She walked to the mirror and checked her reflection. The frightened girl from Somerset was gone. The woman staring back wore diamonds in her ears and the steel of the Blackwood name in her spine. When she entered the blue drawing room, the tableau before her was almost pitiable. Her father, Baron Vane, looked older, his face ruddier, his coat slightly frayed at the cuffs. Edmund stood by the window, looking terrified, twisting his hat in his hands. And Clarissa sat on the sofa, heavily pregnant, her face pale and drawn, stripped of its usual golden glow. The lavender dress she wore was stained at the hem. They looked small. They looked defeated. "Isabella," her father breathed, standing up as she entered. He looked around the opulent room, at the silk wallpaper, the crystal chandelier, the marble fireplace, with naked greed. "My God, you have done well for yourself." "Father," Isabella said coolly, not offering her cheek. She nodded to the others. "Clarissa. Edmund. Isabella, We didn't know where else to go, Clarissa burst out, tears instantly welling in her eyes. London is so expensive, and the inn was dreadful, and Edmund. Edmund has had a run of bad luck, Reginald interrupted, glaring at his son-in-law. Bad luck? Isabella raised an eyebrow, taking a seat in the high-backed armchair opposite them. She did not invite them to sit. They had already made themselves comfortable. Or bad judgment? Edmund flushed. The harvest failed in Somerset, Isabella. And there were investments. I tried to double Clarissa's dowry on the exchange, and it vanished. You gambled it away, Isabella translated flatly. We are ruined, Clarissa sobbed. They are going to take the estate. We will be on the streets. You must help us, Isabella. You are a duchess. You have millions. Just a small loan, £5,000, would save us. Isabella looked at her sister, the girl who had smirked at the altar, the girl who had stolen her life without a second thought. Now she was begging for crumbs from the table she had kicked Isabella away from. You want my husband's money, Isabella said. The husband you mocked, the marriage you pitied. We are family, Reginald blustered. It is your duty. You cannot sit here in luxury while your father and sister starve. Duty? Isabella laughed, a low, cold sound that made Edmund flinch. Where was your duty, father, when you locked me in my room? Where was your duty, Clarissa, when you crawled into my betrothed's bed? You did not act like family then. You acted like wolves. And now that you are the sheep, you expect the shepherd to save you? Isabella, please, Edmund pleaded, stepping forward. I made a mistake. I see that now. I should never have. Do not finish that sentence, Isabella snapped, her eyes flashing. Do not dare insult me by pretending you regret your choice only because it led you to poverty. If you were rich, you wouldn't be here. The door to the drawing room opened. The temperature in the room plummeted. Sebastian stood in the doorway. He had not been in meetings. He was wearing his riding gear, mud splattered on his boots, a riding crop tapping rhythmically against his thigh. His expression was one of terrifying boredom. Henderson told me we had an infestation, Sebastian drawled, walking into the room. He didn't look at the veins. He looked at Isabella. Are you handling it, my dear, or shall I call the gamekeeper? Reginald Vane puffed up his chest, trying to summon the authority of a baron. Now see here, your grace. I am Baron Vane. I am your father-in-law. I demand some respect. Sebastian turned his head slowly. He looked at Reginald as if he were a smudge of dirt on a pristine window. You are a leech, Sebastian said softly, and I do not negotiate with parasites. The silence that followed Sebastian's insult was thick enough to choke on. Reginald sputtered, purple with rage, but he didn't advance. There was a violence in Sebastian's stillness that warned any sane man to keep his distance. Sit down, Sebastian commanded. It wasn't a shout, but the authority in his voice snapped Reginald's knees, and he collapsed back onto the sofa. Sebastian walked to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a brandy, and remained standing. He took a sip, his eyes scanning the three intruders. You came for £5,000, Sebastian stated. It wasn't a question. How? How did you know? Edmund stammered. Because that is the exact sum of the promissory notes you signed to Lord Holloway at the darker tables of the St. James Club last week, Sebastian said casually. And it is the sum required to stop the foreclosure on the Sterling estate, which is currently held by the Bank of London. Edmund turned white. You know about Holloway? I know everything, Mr. Sterling. I told my wife on the day we met that I make it my business to know the value of things. Sebastian set his glass down. And I know the value of you. It is precisely 0. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sheaf of papers tied with a black ribbon. He tossed them onto the coffee table in front of the veins. They landed with a heavy thud. "What is this?" Clarissa whispered, reaching for them. "Those," Sebastian said, "are your debts, all of them. The mortgage on the Sterling estate, the liens on Baron Vane's lands, the gambling markers from the club, every penny you owe to every creditor in England." Isabella stared at her husband. "Sebastian? You paid them?" "I bought them," Sebastian corrected, looking at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "I own them. I own the roof over their heads, the clothes on their backs, and the ground they walk on." He turned back to the Vanes, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Technically, I could have you thrown in debtor's prison this afternoon, Edmund. And you, Lord Vane, I could strip of your title and leave you to rot in a workhouse. I have the legal right to destroy you completely." Clarissa let out a strangled sob. Reginald looked grey. Edmund was shaking. "However," Sebastian continued, "I am not the one who will decide your fate." He walked over to Isabella, taking her hand and pulling her to stand beside him. He placed his other hand on her waist, a solid, heavy weight of support. "This woman," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "is the Duchess of Ashford. She is the person you betrayed, humiliated, and discarded. You thought she was worthless. Now, her word is the only thing standing between you and total ruin." He looked down at Isabella. "It is your choice, my love. Say the word, and I will burn these papers, clear their debts, and send them back to Somerset with a fresh start. Or, say the word, and I will call the constables, evict them from their homes, and let them face the consequences of their own greed." Isabella looked at the papers. Then she looked at her family. Clarissa was weeping openly now, looking at Isabella with terrified eyes. "Isabella, please. The baby. Please." Edmund had his head in his hands. Her father was staring at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Isabella felt a surge of power, heady and intoxicating. She held their lives in her palm. She could crush them. She wanted to crush them. The memory of the church, the laughter, the shame, it all rose up like bile. But then she felt Sebastian's hand on her waist. He wasn't telling her what to do. He was giving her the weapon, but letting her choose how to swing it. He was validating her power, not his own. Isabella took a deep breath. She looked at Clarissa, not as a rival, but as a pathetic, broken girl who had married a weak man. "I will not destroy you," Isabella said quietly. Clarissa sobbed in relief. "Oh, thank God, thank you. Isabella, thank you." "Quiet!" Isabella commanded. Her voice was sharp. "I am not finished." She stepped away from Sebastian and picked up the papers. "I will not send you to prison, and I will not evict you, because that would make me like you, cruel for the sake of cruelty." She looked at Sebastian. "Keep the debts." "Isabella?" Edmund looked confused. "My husband will retain ownership of your debts," Isabella declared, her voice ringing in the silent room. "You will return to Somerset. You will work the land. You will live modestly. Every quarter, you will send the accounts to me. If I see a single penny wasted on gambling or new dresses or brandy, then, and only then, will I call in the debt." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with her father's. "You are not free. You are on parole. You live on my mercy now. And you will never, ever darken my door again, unless I summon you. Do you understand?" "Yes," Reginald whispered hoarsely. "Yes, Isabella." "Duchess," she corrected. "Yes. Duchess. Then go, she said, before I change my mind. They scrambled out of the room like rats fleeing a sinking ship, clutching their hats and shawls, not daring to look back. When the door clicked shut, silence returned to the blue drawing room. Isabella stood trembling slightly, the adrenaline fading. She felt Sebastian move behind her. His arms came around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on the top of her head. Magnificent, he whispered into her hair. Isabella turned in his arms to face him. His blue eyes were blazing with something she had never seen before. Pride, and something hotter. You bought their debts, she said. That must have cost a fortune. It was a small price to pay, Sebastian said, his hand coming up to cup her face. For what? Revenge? For you, he said simply. To see you stand tall. To give you the justice you deserved. I told you, Isabella. I protect what is mine. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. Is that what I am, Sebastian? Just something you own, like the debts, like the estate? Sebastian went still. He looked at her, searching her face, his mask completely gone. No, he said, his voice rough. You are the only thing in this God-forsaken world that I don't want to control. You are the only thing I fear losing. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't the chaste peck of their wedding day. It was a hungry, desperate claim, a kiss that tasted of brandy and suppressed longing. Isabella melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, finally understanding the truth. He hadn't just saved her. He had fallen for her, and she, God help her, had fallen for the wolf. The weeks following the confrontation with the Vanes were a golden age for Ashford House. The icy silence of the mansion had been replaced by the warmth of a true marriage. Sebastian was no longer the absent landlord of his own life. He was present, attentive, and fiercely devoted. However, happiness in the ton is often a beacon for those who wish to destroy it. It was a crisp November morning when the shadow finally fell. Isabella was in the library, organizing the invitations for the Christmas ball, when the doors burst open. It was not Sebastian, but Mr. Davies, the family solicitor, looking ashen. "Your Grace," Davies gasped, clutching his chest. "You must come. It is the Duke." Isabella dropped her quill, ink splattering across the pristine guest list. "What has happened? Is he injured?" "He has been arrested, Your Grace." The world tilted on its axis. "Arrested? On what grounds?" "Treason," Davies whispered, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Lord Holloway, the man who held your father's debts, he has gone to the Crown. He claims the Duke's shipping interests in the Indies are a cover for funding French insurgents. They have taken him to the Tower." Isabella did not faint. She did not scream. The fire that had been kindled in her since her wedding day roared into an inferno. She remembered Sebastian's words, "I protect what is mine." "Prepare the carriage," Isabella ordered, her voice cutting through the panic in the room like a knife. "And send for the Dowager Duchess. I am going to the palace." The interrogation room in the Tower of London was damp and smelled of despair. Sebastian sat on a wooden stool, his hands in irons. He looked tired, his cravat missing, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. But his eyes were undimmed, blue steel meeting the gaze of his accuser. Lord Holloway stood by the door, smug and corpulent. "Admit it, Blackwood. You bought those debts to silence me because I knew about your dealings. Sign the confession, forfeit your estates, to the Crown, and by extension, to me as the informant, and you might keep your head." "I would rather lose my head than bow it to a worm like you," Sebastian spat. The heavy iron door groaned open. "I believe," a clear female voice rang out, "that the Duke is finished answering questions." Sebastian's head snapped up. Isabella stood in the doorway. She was not wearing the dark colours of a grieving wife. She wore crimson velvet, a colour of war, and the Ashford diamonds blazed at her throat. Behind her stood the captain of the guard, looking thoroughly cowed, and an elderly man carrying a heavy leather satchel. "Isabella," Sebastian said, his voice cracking, "get out of here. It isn't safe." "Quiet, Sebastian," she said gently, walking into the cell as if it were her own drawing room. She turned to Holloway. "Lord Holloway, you claim my husband is a traitor based on shipping manifests from the Gilded Gull, correct?" Holloway narrowed his eyes. "The evidence is irrefutable." "The evidence is a forgery," Isabella stated. She signalled to the elderly man. "This is Mr. Thaddeus Holt. He is the harbour master at the East India docks, and he has brought the original logs." Mr. Holt stepped forward, placing the leather satchel on the table. "The Duchess is right. The Gilded Gull was in dry dock for repairs during the dates listed on your manifests, my lord. It couldn't have sailed to France. It didn't have a rudder." Holloway turned a shade of puce. "This is a trick?" She paid him off. "No." Isabella stepped closer to Holloway, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "But I did find something interesting while reviewing the accounts of the debts my husband purchased from you. It seems you have been selling non-existent shares of a copper mine in Cornwall to half the House of Lords." She pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. "Fraud, Lord Holloway, on a massive scale. I have already sent copies to the Prime Minister. The guards aren't here for the Duke anymore." Holloway looked at the guards. The captain stepped forward, hand on the hilt of his sword. "Lord Holloway, you are under arrest for fraud and conspiracy." As Holloway was dragged screaming from the cell, Isabella didn't watch him go. She rushed to Sebastian. The guard unlocked the irons, and the moment his hands were free, Sebastian pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "You foolish, wonderful woman," he murmured, his body shaking against hers. "You walked into the tower for me. You walked into a loveless marriage for me," she whispered back, tears finally spilling onto his shirt. "I told you, Sebastian. We are partners." 3 years later, the gardens of Blackwood Hall were in full bloom, a riot of roses that Isabella had planted herself. The summer air was filled with the sound of bees and the distant laughter of a child. Sebastian sat on a stone bench, a small boy of 2 years old, balancing precariously on his knee. The boy had Isabella's dark hair and Sebastian's piercing blue eyes. "Again! Again!" the boy squealed. "One more time, Leo!" Sebastian laughed, bouncing the air to the dukedom. "Then it is time for your nap, or your mother will have my head." Isabella walked across the lawn, shielding her eyes from the sun. She carried a basket of strawberries, her other hand resting on the swell of her stomach. Another Blackwood was on the way. She stopped to watch them, the terrifying Wolf of Ashford playing horsey with a toddler. Sebastian looked up and saw her. The look on his face was one of such profound peace and adoration that it still took her breath away. He set Leo down, who promptly toddled off to chase a butterfly under the watchful eye of a nursemaid. Sebastian stood and walked to her, taking the basket from her hand and pulling her close. "You look tired," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "I am happy," she corrected. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly, his voice serious. "The scandal? The sister you lost? The life you left behind?" Isabella looked out at the rolling hills of the estate, then back at the man who had given her the world. "I didn't lose a sister, Sebastian. I lost a shadow. And in return, I found the sun. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. I have no regrets, she whispered, only gratitude that they broke my heart. For if they hadn't, I never would have let you heal it. Sebastian smiled, the true, unguarded smile of a man who is finally home. He kissed her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Come, Duchess," he said. "Let us go inside. Our life is waiting." And that is the story of Isabella and Sebastian, from a jilted bride standing alone at the altar to a powerful duchess who tamed the wolf of London. Isabella proved that sometimes the worst day of your life is just the beginning of your best adventure. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more historical romances, like this one. What did you think of Isabella's revenge on her family? Was she too kind, or did she do the right thing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I have a darker, more mysterious Victorian drama coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.